This week, Kumar and Emmet talk about Into the Woods by Emily Carroll. It's a collection of her comics from the web and very scary. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. Deconstructing Comics earns a bit of money from your purchase that helps us keep the show going. We really appreciate your support.
This is Kumar.
And this is Emmet.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Kumar and Emmet in Melbourne. We're on Skype this time, rather than face-to-face. We're going to talk about Emily Carroll's Through the Woods from, I think, 2014.
Yes, 2014.
Yeah, so we're super late to the party on this one again.
Well, no, let's give ourselves some credit. We are talking about Emily Carroll today in the year of our Lord 2020.
Oh, 2020.
Because
yes.
She has a new book.
Yes, she has a new book. And in my defense, I did try to convince Tim to talk about this book when it came out.
Okay.
He read the description. He's like, it doesn't sound like my kind of thing. He actually scares very easily. And he doesn't like watch thrillers or anything like that. He doesn't like tension.
Yeah.
I think is what he said.
He has said that. And look, to his, again, in the plus column as far as he's concerned, this is a very scary book.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I did try, and she does have a new book out from the soon-to-be shuttered Koyama Press, and I bought that book as well. So that came out. So she's a little bit in the, I don't know what's the word, in the media, or kind of in the consciousness a little bit at the moment. So I guess it's a good time to revisit this old collection of 5 short stories. The new book is called When I Arrived at the Castle, which it's a very Shirley Jackson-esque kind of title.
Yes.
In fact, I think there was a Jackson book called We Have Always Lived in the Castle.
We've Always Lived in the Castle, which is about the family, who are isolated by the community, and something terrible has happened in the past which does not get spoken of.
Right.
Which really sort of slips into Carroll's work in terms of these ideas of something deep and dark rising up.
Yeah.
It is funny you mentioned Shirley Jackson, because I did a whistle-stop tour of reviews of this collection, and Shirley Jackson was mentioned a bunch, but the immediate point of comparison for me would have been Angela Carter.
Oh, right.
The Bloody Chamber.
Yeah.
Which has it also has a Bluebeard narrative. In this story, A Lady's Hands Are Cold is like the Bluebeard story. In Carter's story, it's sort of taken a sort of feminist twist, a flip. And this idea of feminist gothic, which is usually quite subversive, is very much at play in The Bloody Chamber. Yeah. This sort of uses that too. So I was surprised to see Jackson, because Jackson to me is more sort of blue blood American Gothic, this idea of stately homes and late 19th century, early 20th century proud families, and this idea of a new America rising up, becoming a world power, and now having its own Gothic tradition, which reflects the aristocracy in their country.
I think if you read When I Arrived at the Castle, you'll find it's both of those things. It's a weird Gothic thing. It's very strange, but we need to describe Carol's strangeness in general before we can make any sense of When I Arrived at the Castle. But it's got this character that's kind of a cat, almost like a furry, that shows up, and there's this castle with it's like a vampire kind of character. I mean, she sleeps in a coffin, and she's the cat lady's going to kill her with stakes, but she's not really like a vampire in any other traditional way, and she does drink blood. But it's interesting because normally Carroll doesn't go to the old standbys of vampires or werewolves or whatever, or witches. Her creatures are they're her own supernatural things.
They're sort of fairy tale creatures, but
Yes.
fairy tale monsters, but with a twist, a slight inflection of her own.
I would say more than slight. I don't think we've seen these kind of things before. They're almost like they reminded me of the Babadook as well.
Oh yeah,
As like here's a new monster kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's but yeah, you're right about the fairy tale thing.
I'd just like to go back a step. I'd like to revisit your Babadook comparison, because I think one of the interesting moments in that film is when Essie Davis's mother goes to the police station to try and get some help for this entity that's in her home and terrorizing her and her son. And she sees the ink smudged on the policeman's hands. And she has this terrified response because she associates that smudge with the Babadook, this idea of inky blackness. And that, to me, is something I see in Carroll's art as well, which is this sort of looseness about it. And these sort of occasionally smudged quality as well. And this idea of tactile art. You can see the splashes of color and the bleeding on the page, and the Bluebeard story that I mentioned before, the idea of the dead woman's song actually traveling through the page. There's all these sort of floating elements. And I mean, we can save this for later in the conversation, but I just want to pin it here. I'm really interested in discussing how Carroll's experience as making comics for web influenced her approach to panel structure.
Well, this is an interesting thing too, because before this collection came out, this one story called His Face All Red dropped like a bombshell on the web. It was released as a web comic, and it got picked up by a lot of the mainstream sites at the time. I can't remember, like maybe Comics Alliance or something like that. And it was kind of all over the place, like you have to see this thing. And I think you had to scroll straight down the page, is my memory. I don't think there was any click-through of pages. Yeah, we'll get to that. I'm going to take two steps back and say it's not super untimely, because typically I read this thing that period horror movies tend to be financial failures. But recently we've had a little bit of a resurgence interest in pastoral horror because of The Witch and Midsummer. And I think this ticks some of those boxes as well. Because a lot of them are set not in the present. There is one story she did called, she did this issue of Frontier, and it's called Anne by the Bed. And I think this comic is probably unobtainable now. I'm not sure how hard or easy it is to get issues of Frontier. It's number 6. It's kind of set in the present, but it's kind of urban legends about this thing that happened 100 years ago or 75 years ago or something like that. So it's also still set mostly in the past. Okay, so now, here's what I know about Emily Carroll before I wanted to mention as well, because she's from London, Ontario. Now, I spent about a year in London doing my master's, and my older brother, had been living there for a few years at the time. And when I showed up, the things he told me 2 facts. He said, everybody does their product testing in London because it's supposedly the most conservative city in Canada. So if you can sell something there, you can sell it anywhere. And the other thing he said was that Statistics Canada did all of their statistics there because it was the most average city in Canada. Now, I don't know why I'm bringing this up particularly, but I recently listened to a podcast about John Carpenter, and they talked about Bowling Green, where he grew up, and how that influenced Halloween a lot. And to me, it's interesting that London is this really super conservative, nondescript kind of city, small city. But I don't know if that informs the nature of this work at all or what. I just found it was a really interesting side by side that maybe is of no interest whatsoever, but.
No, I think you've got something there. I mean, I would add. I mean, we are bringing up film a lot here, and I've got some other comics you can maybe drop allusions to in terms of the possible influence of Carroll, or maybe the fact that she's coming up with a wave, and there's just a few other artists in a similar style cresting at the same time. But in terms of background, the first one that popped into my head when you mentioned John Carpenter was David Lynch.
Sure.
Because he also had this very average, normal upbringing.
Right.
You know, nuclear family.
Right.
Very normal background, no evident trauma, no sense of alienation as a child, very happy childhood by all accounts. And then he had this experience as a young man where I think he was in Philadelphia, and he just had this shock of alienation at the industrial decay of Philadelphia. And it's probably because he led such a sheltered life, and I'm making assumptions here, that when he encountered urban decay and industrial decay, he just had this reaction, and this art came out of him as a response to that. And in his work, you see this notion of disturbance, and it's usually located at this point where the natural world encounters a world of metal and oil and electricity. And those are the vectors of his inspiration, from Twin Peaks to Mulholland Drive to the latest thing he's done on Netflix, What Did Jack Do, I think it's called.
Yeah. It's like a short, it's 20 minutes or something, is that right?
17 minutes. Yeah. I just watched it last night, so it's on my mind. Extraordinary. I didn't know what I was watching for the first while, and then it built to a crescendo, and I just... my wife was in bed next door, in the room next door, and I woke her up. I was just laughing hysterically. And I think Emily Carroll has a similar thing with this idea of strained normality. You know, normality under threat, normality under siege. And a lot of it involves family relationships or close personal relationships. And then something alien coming in from the outside.
Yes and no, but I think a lot of times the starting point is not even normality. So, like, the first story in the collection is called Our Neighbor's House. Yes. And from the first page, the dad is going out hunting. He leaves the 3 daughters alone. We don't know. There's no mother. He leaves 3 daughters. He said, if I'm not back in 3 days, walk to the neighbor's house. Now, the story is called Our Neighbor's House, so we know we know from page 1 what's going to happen. But right from there, I mean, I read this book 3 times in the lead up to this, and it sounds like a cliche, but every time I noticed something I didn't the previous time. Like, on the 3rd day, the moon is blood red, and she knows that her father has died. But it seems then the 3 daughters start disappearing, like they're visited by someone in the night, by some man with a smile, wearing a hat. We don't know any more than that. And then at the end, she herself walks to the neighbor's house, and the door is opened, seemingly by the man. Now, from page 1, from panel 1, why did the father tell them go to the neighbor's house after 3 days? Did the father know that the neighbor was this thing? Like, why did he tell them to go there? I think right away we don't have some of the stories do have a kind of, these are normal people, normal friends, things are supposed to be normal, but I think a few of them, like this one, is really, you're in a fairy tale from the get-go. Yeah.
And it's actually one of my favorite stories in the collection.
Sure.
This one and The Nesting Place are the 2 ones I get an absolute chill out of every time I read.
Yeah.
I mentioned there was a couple of comics that I wanted to throw in the mix in terms of possibly being influenced by this or being very similar. And there's a recent comic book series called Black Stars Above by Lonnie Nadler and Jenna Cha.
Okay.
And that's also about, you were talking about pastoral horror, it's also about a family isolated in the snowy wilderness, this idea of families, parents willing to sacrifice the futures of their children for a sense of survival, and whether or not the children can fight back or strike out on their own. And then there's something strange, there's some strange sort of presence circling the main character. I won't say any more than that. The art style's really beautiful as well. There's this almost woodcut appeal to Jenna Cha's work. So you've got this idea of period from it. But this idea of isolation and cold and then survival. So when you ask the question, does he know the nature of the neighbor? Possibly. I mean, it's sort of, it lives in this knife edge ambiguity as to what actually is going on here. But maybe maybe the simple explanation is he assumed the nearby house would be a safe port of call because somebody's living there. He knows somebody's living there. And it's a last resort as well. He expects to come back, but he doesn't.
In a lot of the stories, we don't really... There's so many unanswered questions.
Yes.
And none of these things are detrimental to the stories. It is the nature of the stories themselves that things don't add up. Like, in His Eyes All Red, and this guy has killed his brother, but from page 1, his brother is back. His brother's returned, and he tells a story about how they went into the woods to hunt this wolf, and his brother ended up killing the wolf, and so the main character ended up killing the brother and dropping him in this pit which smelled like lilacs, which they stumbled across, and they didn't really know what it was, but he kind of buried him there, and then 3 days later the brother came back, a bit like Pet Sematary. But he's all normal, and his coat, which had been torn, is fine, but then the brother goes out. He notices his brother goes out at night and is digging this pit, and then he goes out to the pit, and then he goes down, and his brother is lying there with the torn coat. Why was he digging this pit? Why was he sleeping in it? What did his wife notice that he wasn't sleeping in the house, or are there two of them, or what? We don't know anything, and yet none of it. These are genuinely frightening comics, and there's so much masterful control of the color and the lettering, just the capitalization, the punctuation, the composition, the tempo. Everything is considered and deliberate. There's nothing that doesn't contribute to the atmosphere. And there's I think there's a lack of constraints. She just designs a page, and there's no constraints like word balloons or panel borders. She just makes the page. And I think, so these aren't plot holes. They're there to worry you. You worry about them.
Yeah.
There's a whole thing where the brother has come back, and the dead brother won't look at the living brother. This is a little detail he gives us. He's come back, he acts totally normal, he's the charming guy he always was, he's the life of the party, but he will not look at the living brother. And in that last page, he turns, he's sleeping with his back to us, and the next panel he turns upwards, and his eyes are pointed upwards, and we don't know if he's going to turn and look at the brother. It's the end of the story. We don't even know why did he turn at the sound of the living brother or what.
But he's also been dreaming of the brother's bloodied face.
Yes.
So he's been having nightmares of his brother's corpse.
Yeah.
And there's also this suggestion that the eyes are just about to look at him.
Yes.
In the dream.
Yeah.
And this is a doppelganger story, I think. So there's the dead brother in the pit, and then there's the aspect of the brother, a vengeful aspect of the brother, who's almost like taunting the jealous brother.
But is he vengeful?
Well, yeah, because I think he's trapped down there in the hole with whatever force.
But how did he end up in the hole? Because that's not the hole in the woods.
He went down the hole to find out what was going on down there.
No, but I mean the dead brother.
Whatever malign influence is responsible for this, because this is not a natural occurrence. Like, he killed his brother, that should be the end of it. But it's almost like Greek myth, this idea of when you kill family, the Furies come for you. That's the absolute taboo. You can't kill family.
I get that, but when he murdered the charismatic brother, he left the charismatic brother in that pit in the woods that smelled like lilacs. And when he goes down the ladder and sees him at the end of the story, It's the pit in the backyard.
Yeah. He's traveled all the way to it on the ground.
Right. But there's another one above ground. Apparently.
So it's an unnatural space.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a space of vengeance. And again, with David Lynch, you have that idea of doubles. This idea of which I think is very tied up with German myth and German fairy tales. This idea of your evil self, and Jung then had this idea of the shadow self, which he took from there, and then Lynch and Mark Frost lean on Jung a lot. There's lots of nods to Jung in Twin Peaks in particular, and I think that's there's a trace of that here too. This idea of the good person died, but the good person's revenant is not a good person. is out for blood, out for vengeance. And we have a similar sort of aspect of vengeance with the idea of the undead wife as well.
Right.
Our Lady's hands are cold. A lady's hands are cold. Similar idea. It's not you can't reason with the dead. You can't get them on your side. They're the dead. They are jealous of your life and they will kill you. Maybe, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it ends on this note of ambiguity, and I love that. That's where I live. That's the stuff I really enjoy.
Yes.
But I notice that critics tend not to like that. Now, whatever Emily Carroll has done, anyone I mention her work to, I get this very enthusiastic response. Before we agreed to do this, or before we actually figured out when we were going to do this discussion, I couldn't find my copy. And I texted around a few different people. I was like, "Oh, did I lend you my copy of Through the Woods?" And I hadn't, of course, I hadn't. It was under a pile of books here in my spare room. But each of them then got back to me and they're like, "Oh, but it's very good, isn't it? It's very good." So I think she's a creator who just connects straight to the reader. Like there's this sense of, as you said, you don't know. The pages are laid out in such a way that you don't know what's going to happen. No, there's no sense of regularity to any of this. It's all completely unexpected. And that's what makes it so frightening and disturbing. But I have noticed, and maybe because they're agents of order, I'm not really sure, I have noticed some of the critical reviews I've read have raised as a criticism the ambiguity. They don't know where it's going, so there's something wrong.
Those spaces are the frightening spaces. Those empty gaps. Like why? What? Who is that man in the hat that appears? Why does he wait till after the father is gone to show in our neighbor's house? All this kind of stuff. I think one thing that's interesting that's missing is emotion. So, like in his Face All Red, we don't really know. We don't get the sense of the unpopular brother hates the other brother. We see the facts that the charismatic brother is the life of the party. And then they got into the woods, and we have to kind of piece together that he's going to be shamed that he volunteered to kill the wolf, but it wasn't him that did it, his brother did it. And we have to kind of piece it together. But also, a lady's hands are cold. She starts finding the pieces of this ghost, a corpse in the walls of the house in different places. The head over here, the arms over here, feet over here. And she's piecing them together, but we don't get any emotion from the main character. How does she even feel about it? We don't really know. I think that's really interesting. And again, I don't think it's detracts from her. I think it's the point. I think Carroll is really masterfully specific about what she wants in these stories. I don't think there's anything. I don't think there are any missteps. I think she's like, you know what? You don't get to know how this person feels about it. You have to kind of figure it out. And I think that helps to put you in there. I think it forces you to go. It forces you to go in there and think about it instead of just flipping pages.
Yeah.
As soon as you've read the words on the page without looking at the drawings, you have to really unpack it to make sense of it.
I think that you're absolutely right. And I also think what you're describing there is total control and confidence.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I do wonder if this has a relationship to how these works were produced for web. Because,
Yeah.
in effect, she's pioneering a style. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, there were many, many web comics before her, but also I felt there was this sort of hybrid of form
Sure.
of web comics where they were still using panels and they were still using bleeds and all the rest of it. And as you said, you had comics of hers where you were scrolling down, so it was a different it was a different action even, which lends itself to the dread.
Yeah.
Because you're not going left to right, you're going down.
Yeah. And you can't scan ahead when you're going down.
Yeah.
And she's kind of she's been very clever about the way she's laid things out for this book, because like in the last two panels of His Face All Red, where he's lying with his back to us, and then he turns and he looks up. So it's the same drawing, effectively. It's the same angle. Everything's the same, except in one he's back and his back is turned, and in the other he's looking up, as if he's about to turn all the way and look at the brother that he has never looked at since his return. She just simply put the two quote unquote panels on two different pages. So there's a gap where you're forced to. You can't just scan down. In fact, what worked on the web isn't going to work on paper. She's actually had to put it on the next page over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Space it out a bit. Pacing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the conception of it for that medium gave it a force and gave it a menace.
Yes.
Which I think does translate quite well, like eventually to this printed form.
Yeah.
Coming up, more on Through the Woods. Also, are women better suited to make horror comics? To our patrons on Patreon pledging $4 per month and up, we'd like to get your commentary on your favorite comics of the past decade. Get the details on our Patreon page. If you're not a patron, consider supporting us for as little as $4 a month to get opportunities to participate in our show. This won't be the last one. The deadline for this one is Thursday, February 20th, so join now and you've still got time to participate in this one. To pledge, go to patreon.com/deconcomics. Patreon support has also unlocked classic episodes of Deconstructing Comics. This week's is number 71 from April 16, 2007. It features Brandon, Mulele, and me and is entitled Your Comics Tools, Computer or Pen and Ink? The classic episodes can be found on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by clicking on the earliest months listed on the left sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com or in publicly available posts on our Patreon page or in the Patreon smartphone app. Classic episodes have been unlocked back to number 46. You can help to unlock earlier episodes by pledging. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics.
Welcome to the Superman Fan Podcast. My name is Billy Hogan, and I will be your host. Before we begin our journey through the time barrier, please ensure that your red indestructible capes are securely fastened around your necks so that we may all travel safely into the past to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, and World's Finest Comics. After we return from our journey, I encourage you to go to the website, thesupermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com. I look forward to have you join me each week to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel.
I can't remember if I did read her online first. I can't remember reading her. But I remember the first time I read this collection and just that sense afterwards of putting it down and just feeling, well, this was new.
Yeah.
And, and I think as well, the art style too, this, I remember at the time thinking, what if Kate Beaton did horror? Basically, this is kind of what we've got here, and from the period style to the art style itself, with these sort of pink-nosed faces and rosy cheeks and pale skin, and then these sort of flashes of gore and horror and cold. There's lots of cold spaces in this book.
Yeah. I mean, I was surprised by in the A Lady's Hands Are Cold the amount of blue on the pages.
Yeah.
Instead of horror gothic, you're expecting black or red. It was a lot of blue, with touches of very important touches of red. I think the Kate Beaton comparison is also interesting because something you haven't mentioned is that it's actually a bit cartoonish. The figures, the faces.
That's what I was trying to talk around there, but yeah, that's it exactly.
It's very simplified Tintin, Ligne Claire kind of faces. Again, it doesn't detract from the fact that maybe it's what Scott McCloud would call masking. I don't know if I really believe in if masking is true or not, that you project yourself into a character. He's got more of a smiley face blankness to it. Maybe I think actually it makes it a bit harder to read the emotion, and I think that's part of that deliberate lack of emotion in a lot of the stories. Yeah, but I don't think anybody else could do this because it's not just the drawings, it's the colors. The colors are so, and I'm mostly colorblind, and I was in shock by the way she was throwing shadows around and just the range of the way the palette would go from one end of red to the other or one end of blue to the other. It was really awe-inspiring and hypnotizing and all those things. But there are some moments, I mean, despite the cartoons, like there's in the story My Friend Jana, where Jana is being they're two teens, and Jana is kind of a fake. She's faking these seances for people, but then she's being haunted by a real ghost from a dead rabbit. Now that's frightening. Just some of these concepts alone are really like touching a dead rabbit and then being haunted by the ghost of an animal. It's upsetting. But she starts making these drawings, and we get to see the drawings she's making, these notebooks. She just draws compulsively after she's been possessed, and they're really hellish kind of black metal, Clive Barker-ish kind of stuff. It's very, occult looking, frightening thing. So, I mean, she does, again, it's the point I'm getting to is that cartoonishness is deliberate because she can draw whatever she wants. I think she can draw in the other styles when she just puts her mind to it and she does it. It's because it's there in this book. We get to see it in that story.
I really enjoyed My Friend Jan as well because it reminded me of the story about the Cottingley fairies. Where
yes.
Elsie Wright and Francis Griffiths.
Yeah.
And poor Arthur Conan Doyle came down to insist that they were genuinely visited by fairies, and this was not fraud. Because as much as Sherlock Holmes is the icon of deductive reasoning, Doyle himself was into some strange stuff.
Yeah.
And that these two young girls pulled this stunt on the press, on their families, on everyone. But I think they didn't admit that it was fake until they were on their deathbeds or something. They kept it going for a long time. And there's something similar happening here, where the two girls are, being very maliciously making fun of these people who want to contact their dead relatives. And they themselves then get drawn into this occult space because they're on that board, they're on that threshold of belief and unreality. When she's messing around in the walls, is she actually attracting the attention of these sort of forces?
Right.
What would you call it? Thanaturgic forces? I'm not sure. And then her friend gets possessed by this creature, whatever this is. And I find it, yeah, it's really interesting, just sort of that idea of innocence and mischievousness, and then something evil creeping in between those two.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about the nesting place, which is the other one you liked.
Oh, my favorite.
Right.
Oh, I love it.
I'm going to say that there's probably something, I don't know if I'm right or wrong about this, but there's a real Kazuo Umezu vibe to this story. Now, Umezu did horror comics for basically teen girls or preteen girls. Or a lot of them were like that. And they often have an older woman who's kind of tormenting a younger woman, and there's a scene in this, one of the women has, I don't know even how to describe it, she's almost adopted these creatures, these worm-like creatures from a pond, like in a cave, deep inside this cave, and they've taken over her from when she was a little girl. And there's a scene where you get to see her face where the worms all come out, and her teeth are like free floating. Like the drawing almost doesn't make sense. It's like, how can the teeth be over there or whatever? But all that stuff is a real Umezu vibe. Now, I don't know if Carroll's ever read any Umezu, but I love that part of it. And I think that, now, my guess is that you wouldn't have known about any of that. And maybe Carroll doesn't either, but I love that this works on that level as well as all the other levels.
It's funny you should bring that up, though, because I was going to throw another name into the mix.
Yep.
Tatiana Davidson,
okay,
who is an Australian comic creator. She's based in New South Wales, and she did a comic which made a big splash, pun entirely unintentional, called Blackfish. I hate myself. And I remember when that came out, everyone around the Australian comics traps were very excited because they're like, what is this?
Yeah.
And it's a story about a young girl in a suburban home who notices a strange black fish in, I think it's in a koi pond. Mm. So already you have this sort of nod to Japanese culture. Mm-hmm. And then the fish gets bigger and bigger and then starts eating everything. And I won't spoil the story itself, but the basic idea is that the creature starts growing in size. Mm. And I remember reading it for the first time. It's very short. It's a very short little impactful comic, but I remember reading it for the first time and thinking of Spirited Away,
right,
by Miyazaki.
Okay, yep.
When you have the hungry ghost eating all of the inhabitants of that magical city, and thinking, well, this is Miyazaki but straight horror.
Yeah.
You know, that notion of Miyazaki, that disturbing creature that he introduced, but then is contained within this quite lovely family drama. And Davidson lets it loose. Just lets the monster loose. And I raised Davidson as well because not only do I think she's riffing on either anime or manga, I'm not sure, but I think you're right. I think there's an influence there. I think she also is in line with or influenced by Carroll, because her art style also has that simplicity you talked about before. The simple faces, but then there's the detailing, which is what makes it disturbing. That sort of mixture of simple and complex. And the nesting place has that too, where you have the girl, her sister-in-law, and are they actually married? I've forgotten.
Oh, good question. And I read it 3 times. I think they were engaged?
I think they're engaged, yeah, because, yes, of course, because, again, that's this sort of an idea of contracts, whether or not it's too late to break up the relationship, which is a very fairy tale type idea. So you've got the girl and the sister-in-law, and they're a young girl and then this grown woman, and this idea of bodies and this idea of growing older. And then there's something inside the older woman which is wrong. And then you've got the body horror that comes into it.
Yeah.
And I saw that in Blackfish too.
Yeah.
This idea of a body and a child. the child looking at that body
Mm.
and not quite understanding what it is, but there's this sense of unnatural about the body because it's transitioning.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think they're all drawing from some shared source.
Yeah.
I went to fairy tales earlier, but I also think you're right. I think manga has more speculation on that than the more defined Western comic style,
Yeah. Well,
which doesn't allow for the invasion of body as much.
Right. Well, this one is the least fairy tale like, and it's the most like that nuclear family almost that you were describing, like the ordinariness.
Yeah.
Where it's the brother and his fiance have a perfect kind of relationship there. She's so positive and cheery about everything, and she's like really this beautiful kind of flapper, and everything seems really perfect, but we can tell something is wrong. We start hearing stories about how she fell down in this cave when she was a kid or whatever. And this is the most body horror one, I think, because when you see the face open up and all the worms are inside her coming out, especially in the final scenes. I think this one's quite different from the others in that respect.
I wonder if it's the later story.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, there's definitely a shift from this collection to the story she did in Frontier to When I Arrived at the Castle, which is a real departure, I think, in terms of... I mean, normally we've got some human characters interacting with these creatures, but in this one we've got this cat kind of fighting this vampire kind of person. That's really... I mean, When I Arrived at the Castle is even more so. There's no conclusions to be drawn. We don't really know what happened. You get to the end, you don't know what's happened at the end of the story. It's more about the thematic lines that go through it and trying to find threads that you can put together. And I don't even think they do necessarily come together. It's more Lynchian than the other stuff, and I think it's really quite different from anything in Through the Woods.
Yes. Now, I'm very proud of us, Kumar. I'm very proud that we've managed to get through this entire conversation without mentioning the Dreamweaver himself, Neil Gaiman, once. And I'd like that to continue.
Okay.
So I'm bracketing off that mention.
Okay.
But one thing I've always been curious about is how his clearly very popular style of writing and mixture of genre writing for comics hasn't been capitalized on by the mainstream publishers as much after his principal works were big in the 90s and so forth, before he decided to become a novelist. And I've always been curious as to why there wasn't more of a push to explore that, because clearly it had audience pull, and there was also a draw on women readers, and that maybe the superhero titles weren't acknowledging as much.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it interesting that this collection was published by Faber and Faber, and other independent publishers or book publisher sponsored imprints seem to be better at capitalizing on talents like Emily Carroll and books like Through the Woods, and making a lot of money doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still wondering why there's that gap in what we refer to as the comics industry, when these are best-selling comic books from the book industry.
Yeah, how did that happen? How did this get published by Faber and Faber? That's an amazing thing we didn't even talk about, because as far as I knew, was His Face All Red was on the web, and was that it? Like, had she published any other comics? I don't know.
What I'm suggesting is there's an element of gatekeeping happening.
Yes.
In what we refer to as comics.
Yeah.
And the books industry, who are setting up graphic novel imprints, simply ignore that.
Yeah.
And actually score big as a result.
Yeah.
You know, and then you've got the likes of First Second as well, and publishers that are taking a shot on upcoming talent and very complex and ambitious graphic novels and illustrated books, and getting on bestseller lists, and doing really well. Like Smile. Still, why aren't we talking about Smile?
Yeah.
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 Raina Telgemeier, because it's still so good.
Yes.
It's doing so well. It's so successful. And I know I'm the last person in the world to actually make this point, but when you look at the commercial success in that book, how does half of the comics criticism, never mind comics retail, make sense?
Yeah.
It seems like a niche within a niche.
Yeah.
I just don't understand.
Yeah. No, I know where you're coming from. But it's interesting, too, that she's gone after that Faber book. She's put out this issue of Frontier from Youth in Decline, and then now Koyama Press, and they're both boutique publishers. And I don't know. When I read the Castle, I didn't know what it was, and I thought it was going to be a new collection of stories, not a completely new story. And I thought it would contain the Frontier story in it. So this Frontier story, as I said, I think has maybe disappeared now, but it is a powerful story about a woman who's been murdered, and now there's urban legends, and kids play these sleepover games where they try to summon her ghost. It seems to work a bit like Candyman. And it's also got, I love it, it's got a real, because it's set in the present and the past, it's got a real vibe about, there's a patriarchal element to this too, where this woman's been killed, it's revealed at the end, by her brother-in-law. But all the stories from the modern day are like, oh, maybe she was killed by the sister or brother-in-law or both, or maybe it was satanic rituals. Like, there's all this kind of narrative around it, which is detracting from this violent act, horrifically violent act against this woman, her murder.
Yeah.
And it's a really super powerful story. Very scary. There's a similar ending in the Frontier comic and in Through the Woods, which has a conclusion, which has this girl who goes through the woods and avoids the wolf, and then the wolf doesn't get her. But what's the line at the end? Like, the wolf,
I only have to catch you once.
I only have to catch you once. And there's a similar thing in this where a lion has escaped from the zoo, and the mother says, "Don't worry, the lion will come to our house." But then the sister says, "Well, a lion has to come to someone's house." And then it says, "Just as there are many people reading these words right now, all thinking they won't dream of me tonight, won't see me standing over them, won't see my face in the darkness, but one of you will." So why has this... I guess the long way around is getting to why is this reprinted in some Faber and Faber collection? What is going on? Who is printing what?
Yeah, because clearly money's been made. Critical support is on the side of works like this because I think they're the kind of books that excite critics. It gives them something fresh to talk about.
Yeah.
But also it excites readers because they're buying it. So there's something genuinely appealing here.
Yeah.
I'm told that the point of capitalism is to exploit resources.
Yeah.
Here's something for exploitation.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah.
I'm very curious. And I know you've got like the likes of we talked about some Nobrow titles earlier in the year or early last year. Which is a very well curated publisher and again kind of boutique-y. And anyone I share those books with, like John McNaught stuff, for example, it's always a home run. This is great. This is fantastic.
Yeah.
So there's something here, and I don't know why it's not. I know I'm not wishing that it becomes mainstream because that would be a death, but I am curious as to why there isn't more activity around trying to cultivate more creators like this who are interested in these kind of stories.
Well, I think I'm going to go back to what I said very much earlier when we were comparing her to Kate Beaton, or suggesting Kate Beaton do some horror, is I think this is incomparable stuff. I really, genuinely... I mean, how many scary comics are there? And we've talked about this on the show before, on several episodes about horror, and how you need sound and motion and all these kind of things for horror to work. Well, I was wrong. Here it is. Scary, scary comics. I read them 3 times. Third time was still upset and frightened of them. I don't think there's anybody else that can do it. I don't think anybody else can make comics this beautiful and frightening at the same time. And I wonder how many she actually sold through Faber and Faber, and maybe they didn't sell well enough for them to offer her a deal on a second book.
This is speculation at this point. I mean, I'm sure it was fine because we all read it and we all got it. And punters we know, like I told you, I rang around a bunch of people and they were, because I thought I'd lost my copy, and they'd all had it or read it, and they're going, "Oh no, but I don't have your copy." So it clearly was popular. I suspect this is more, and again, speculation again. This is not. I'm not asserting anything is true. I suspect it's probably more personal convenience to publish through a different outlet or publish through a different publisher.
Or creative
Yeah,
freedom,
exactly.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And these were web comics that got adapted for print.
Yeah.
And that speaks to, we talked about her use of control and her confidence in her own storytelling. Maybe she's struck a better deal and she actually has more say in how the thing gets made. You know?
Yeah.
Who knows? In terms of her peers, or in terms of who else could be doing something like this, I think this speaks to a certain trend of women comic creators who are more, how do I put this? Women comic creators who have an inkling for the uncanny that a lot of male comic creators don't seem that interested in.
Right. Yeah.
And unease.
Yeah.
And a sense of creeping fear.
Yeah.
As opposed to the shock of sudden violence.
Yeah.
Which I think the shock of sudden violence plays more into the idea of male ego and action. And it sort of builds on these genre ideas that we already associate with male writers. Whereas this idea of the uncanny, unease, suspense, that plays more in this sort of new wave of women comic creators coming up with more literary backing behind them. And the other one I would mention, the other creator I would mention would be Tilly Walden.
Okay.
And her graphic novel, The End of Summer, is a sort of Baroque fantasy set inside a giant estate, a giant castle, with a family, and members of the family are suffering from mysterious illness. There's a giant cat for some reason, and outside winter rages. This horrible winter. All the castle's sealed, the windows are all sealed to protect them from the cold, and all the family are engaging in some sort of secretive activity. And you, the reader, don't quite know what's happening for the majority of that reading experience.
Okay.
And again, because that sort of style, that simple style that we've mentioned, that's becoming increasingly popular, it's hard to tell the characters apart sometimes, and that's deliberate. To add to your sense of confusion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't want to make any claims in terms of gender or expectations of male versus women writers, and artists and creators and all the rest of it. And this is where we're lacking a woman on the Deconstructing Comics team who can actually speak to some of these issues. And maybe I'm just talking out of my hat, but I do feel there is more of an interest in some of the women creators coming up in exploring these themes and exploring this idea of ambiguity than male creators who seem to be resting on fixed genre tropes and styles that have beginning, middle, and end. We all understand them. We know where this is going. I'm comfortable to read this, even though horrible, horrible things are happening. With some of these creators I've mentioned, it's new to me. It's novel. It's strange. It leaves me disturbed. Emily Carroll is one of the best examples of that. But after I read it, I go, I have not experienced this before.
Yeah.
Or at least not outside of experimental cinema or weird gothic, you know. And typically a lot of those products would be made by women too.
Yeah. Well, I think the page turning experience in a comic book as opposed to film it puts it on another level of uniqueness, because
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something else. Okay. Any final words, or are we good?
I think we're good.
Okay.
I think I managed to deliver a strange, weird rant there about gender and art, and I don't know where I ended up,
Okay,
and I apologize to the listeners.
Into the Woods is published by Margaret K. McElderry Books. Support this and all of our shows by joining us on Patreon. Our tiers start at just $2 a month. Pledge at least $4 a month to get our Patreon-only series Spider-Man 1963 and Tim Catches Up with the MCU. At $4, you can also get opportunities to participate in our show. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics to join the fun. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Next week, the rolling blackout hits Deconstructing Comics. We'll have the week off. But we'll be back in 2 weeks with our favorite comics of the 2010s. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.